And you've been in these briefings, and you know why the administration believes these things are necessary. Do you think, well, the folks out here just don't understand? They don't understand what we're up against. They don't understand the danger. They don't understand the responsibility. Do you think this is a debate that is simply asymmetrical and people can't see why it's necessary? Or is this actually a debate that is fairly being had fairly?
Yes. I think this is a debate that is important to have. I think this is a debate where some transparency is necessary to give people confidence about how these programs are conducted, to give people confidence that just because Verizon or AT&T gives bulk data collection to somebody, and I think there'll be a debate on who will hold that information in the fall, but just because they give that information and might use it later to track a cell phone call once we know a suspect in Yemen or Somalia or something like that, that isn't used in a way that is ultimately nefarious, or that we're listening to every one of these conversations. I listen to some of these debates and I wonder, if you listen to these, you would think we must have 1 million people working for the FBI, because we're listening to 310 billion or million people's phone conversations. Now, if you make 10 calls a day and everybody makes 10 calls a day, you'd have to employ hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people to listen to all these. And we need to have a debate that shows people, here's what we're doing and here's what we're not doing, and how it's conducted in a way that makes people safer. Because regardless of where you stand on this debate, we have clearly gotten information based on cell phone records and calls and picked up clues on events that didn't happen because we stopped those events.
This is really totally disingenuous, right? Yes, phone records can be useful sometimes, which is why you have traditionally a targeted authority once you have a particular contact, a particular number that you think is associated with the terrorist, to get that person's phone records and maybe their associates' phone records. There was legislation Obama very strongly supported in 2005 that would have said that's the limit. A suspected terrorist or spy and their associates 1 hop away, not 3 hops away, pulling in tens of thousands of people who have nothing to do with anything and they're then in a secondary database you can do backdoor searches of. None of the cases they've discussed, which, by the way, often seem to involve funding, not plots. One case they tried to say was a plot. Turned out the prosecutors who actually were involved in that case said, actually, no, there wasn't a specific plot. This was another material support funding case, not a plot case. But there's never been any intelligible case made that they need a bulk database like this in any of the cases they've talked about. In every one of these cases, it would have been sufficient to get a more targeted search. And this is a pattern we've seen again and again with warrantless wiretapping, with fusion centers, saving lives, absolutely necessary. And then a couple of years later, when the inspector generals or the Senate do a real inquiry with access to the classified information, oops, it turns out fusion centers never produced any useful information. Oops, it turns out warrantless wiretapping was of incredibly limited utility. It wasn't pivotal in the cases they said it was. You have to wonder whether they're overselling.
But let's be clear, Ezra. AT&T and Verizon, they don't keep your records, right? So if you want to find
for 2 years,
if you want to find somebody and go backwards several years, how are you going to do that? You can't. You have to have.
But if you want to listen to the conversation from 2 years ago,
you have to have some and you can't listen to a conversation in the past. You have to have some collectible data with which to trace those numbers. And here's why we need to have this debate, because you just slammed together warrantless wiretapping and 7 other things. There isn't warrantless wiretapping, right? You've got to go to a FISA court. You've got to go. You have to have you have to have a warrant for that.
So 702 surveillance is still warrantless wiretapping.
But let's have a debate on what is happening, what is accurate. This notion, again, somehow that hundreds of thousands of people are listening to hundreds of millions of phone calls every day, it's simply not happening.
Spencer, I want to let you get in here.
Yeah, to some degree you're arguing against a meme here, aren't you, Robert, rather than arguing with what Julian is saying. But the point that I think is probably important to make is you heard President Obama say abuses haven't occurred. Well, there are lots of people who believe that the abuse is the simple fact that the government is collecting all of this stuff in the first place without an individualized suspicion of wrongdoing. And then on the question of, Verizon, AT&T, they don't hold the data for a sufficient amount of time for terrorism investigations to look on back, several years, which is an important point to raise. Well, why not have had a debate several years ago when the Obama administration realized that was the issue, and then go to Congress and say, we need some legislation to compel the telecoms to do that, to compel ISPs and so forth to do that. That didn't happen. This occurred entirely in secret. This occurred while the Obama administration was either not talking about it, or intelligence officials were sort of reassuring Congress, particularly those who didn't have access to the intelligence, who weren't on the intelligence committees, that it wasn't happening at all, or giving very, very limited and decontextualized reasons to believe that it was. So when you want to say you have a debate, I mean, this is something of a test of the administration's seriousness.